on me. Something bug on me. Okay, I don't know what to do with this. Okay, I took the ladybug outside. Hi everyone. Today, sorry, I'm still out of breath from like going up and down the stairs to get the ladybug out of my house. I only have a little bit of time before my toddler might wake up, so I'm trying to be fast. But today I wanted to review a book I just finished, The Never-Ending End of the World by Christy. Got some mixed emotions on this one, but let's go ahead and get started and pass more books. So The Never-Ending End of the World is a book that I picked up just because I heard the premise and I was so hooked by the idea that I decided to pre-order the ebook because it was pretty good deal, and forgot about it for a long time because it was on my Kindle, and for some reason I never remember the books that I have on my Kindle app. But I finally got around to reading it, and I had never read an Christy book before, so I didn't really know what to expect, and all I was really expecting was just a cool premise. And I would say that the strongest part of this book really was this premise, the concept, the themes that came out of it, and in general the plot that went along with it. Definitely the strongest aspect of this book. I feel like most other aspects of the book were a little bit lacking, but I think that might just be more due to the author's style and priorities in telling a story. And I think this book would still work really well for certain kinds of readers. So they're not necessarily terrible mistakes or anything like that. So the whole premise of this book is that a sort of apocalyptic event has happened and created this sort of stop in time, more like a loop in time. And there's essentially all of these individual loops of people stuck in like what they were doing at around the time that this event happened, and they're stuck in this time loop and they're just like doing the same thing they were doing. So maybe it was like Saturday morning and they were like making themselves breakfast, or maybe they were taking out the garbage, or they might have been driving down the street and their whole car is in loop with them, or like just whatever they happen to be doing. And some of these time loops are like minutes long, some of them are like seconds long, and it's just this really complicated interwoven loops of people just kind of stuck in a moment of time. And there's very few select individuals who didn't get caught up in these random seeming loops, who now have to try to navigate around these loops because they are not stuck in time, and for them they keep aging, they can move past that moment. And the problem is if they disturb a loop, there are bad consequences. They could get hurt. It can be dangerous. And so they're trying to like live outside of these loops and still like find food and find just the everyday items they need to survive. And it becomes really a story of complicated survival. And I don't know if I really explained it that well, but to me it was just so fascinating, this concept, this very different take on a survival story. I found out as I finished the book that the author actually took her inspiration for this story from her experience in the COVID pandemic and just how difficult it felt to survive and deal with the isolation and these different things. And it's definitely a very different situation. This isn't a COVID plague book, but those ideas of how to deal with this global crisis and learning how to survive in a suddenly different world really come through so well. We start the book out by following Coco, a girl who was 12 when this started, and she wakes up and finds her whole family stuck in these loops. She tragically has to learn very quickly how to survive. And she lives in, here's the thing, she lives in New York City. She's in Manhattan, and it's just chaos because there's so many people and so many loops. And so Coco learns very quickly not to disturb loops, and that she has very limited options for navigating around these loops. She just has to learn very quickly how to adapt to living so that she can find food, find clothing, the different seasons. Like, eventually she has to deal with the weather, and it's really a tough start for her. It's just so interesting to follow her in the beginning and see how she's surviving. The book is structured with Coco's journal entries, like brief journal entries, and then like a chapter, and then a brief journal entry, and then a chapter. So obviously the journal entries are in like a first person as she's writing them, and then the chapters are in third person present tense. Eventually we do meet other characters, and we also take on the perspective of another character named Forrest, and we see he gets a very similar structure to how his narration goes. We get a journal entry and then a chapter in his perspective, and then his journal entry and a chapter in his perspective. So we have different points of the book where we're following Coco, different points when we're following Forrest. And I won't tell you much about Forrest because that's kind of spoilers for Coco's journey later on. When I first started the book, I was flying through it. I mean, it was just the plot was so riveting, and it was just so interesting to see how these people were surviving, and the way the world was adapting to this really bizarre circumstance. And I was really enjoying it. And there came to a point where I was kind of slowing down, and I think I got distracted by another book for a second or two. But I realized that I was struggling a little bit with the prose after a while, and struggling a little bit with the characters after a while. Not to say that I didn't like the characters, because I did like all the characters. I feel like Christy did her best to give us a fairly good cast of characters that had, different personalities and different backgrounds, but I often felt like I just couldn't get attached to them fully. Here's the thing. I feel like the prose and the character work kind of go hand in hand for the most part, and why they didn't work. And here's the thing. Every time there was a journal entry, I was like sucked completely in. I was all in, because it was really the character's voice coming through so well and helping me get to know them, to really care about them, to understand more where they were coming from. Plus they were like really describing very interesting things that were happening. And then we would switch to just the normal chapter, which was always longer. And then it was back to third person present tense, which I don't like that tense anyway. It's a personal thing. Like, I just don't love that tense. And so every time one of those chapters hit, I had a much harder time relating with the characters anyway, because the prose for me was a little bit like, that's not my favorite style. But it was doable, except just every time we switched from a journal entry to like a normal chapter, the character voice just became so generic. Like, it was suddenly so much more about describing what was happening, what was going on, a lot more of like this happened and this happened and this person does this and this person says this. And then there was just so much more of, let's just tell you everything that's happening, instead of letting the characters really like speak for themselves and give you insights into their motivation. And even though those chapters were still in third person limited, so they're still technically from Coco's perspective or from Forrest's perspective, but it almost didn't feel like it, because it was so focused on just telling what was going on. And maybe telling is the wrong word to use here, because I know everybody talks about like showing versus telling and stuff, because like there was still showing. It just felt like the character's voice was always cut off as soon as we got out of the journal entry. And if you're not a very character-driven reader, and that that's not going to bug you, I mean, don't worry about it. I just always wished that I was getting a little bit more of the style of the journal entries during the normal chapters. And I was getting like to probably the 75% mark in the book when I realized like I would really have loved this better, I think, if the whole book was written in journal entries. I think later on the journal entries, some of them get actually pretty long, and I think that was possibly the wrong choice in some cases, and that maybe if we had kept briefer journal entries and then just adjusted the prose in the other chapters to be a little bit more character focused, a little bit more character centric, I think it would have balanced out better. Like I said earlier, I don't think this was necessarily so much a mistake, so much as this is like my preference. I really love a strong blend of character and plot driven stories. Some people really, they only care about the plot. Some people, they really only care about the characters. Some people are more like me, where they really like a strong blend of the character and the plot working together. This story was definitely more plot focused, and there was certainly character elements to it, of course, but it was just more plot focused. For me, it definitely would have been more of a home run if the character arcs and the plot were just a little bit more intertwined, a little bit more connected. But I think there's lots of readers out there who are more plot driven, and they're gonna have an amazing time with this book. They're gonna love it because they connect as much as they need to with the characters, and they really are driven by the plot, the premise, the themes that are coming out through that. This is probably more due to Anne Christie's style of writing and more of her priorities. I would guess that she probably is a very plot-driven writer, and that even though of course her characters are important to her, that the plot is what's really driving the story, and that's just her priority. And I think in this book especially, she had some themes that she really wanted to communicate, and that is something that did really come through. It brings up a lot of great questions. One of the questions actually that I was reflecting on a little bit is I feel like the story brings up the question of, if you were stuck in a loop, like what kind of loop would you want to be stuck in? Because some people are stuck in very mundane loops where they're just like taking out the trash or something. Or maybe they're stuck in kind of a bad loop where they were maybe in the middle of yelling at somebody who they were angry at. And some people are stuck in a really, really sweet, beautiful loop, like a couple kind of giving each other like a loving glance, or a mother taking care of her child. These people, they couldn't really like choose the moment they were looped in, of course. And the people outside of the loops are wondering like how aware these people are. Like, are they aware that they're trapped? Are they just living these moments over and over? It just made me wonder, like, if I got stuck in a loop, if I could live my life in a way that I'm just more often likely to get stuck in a happy loop, in a joyful one where I'm with the people I love, showing them that I love them. I think as I was finishing up the book, I just felt like it was reinforcing to me the idea that I just wanted to live life in a way where I was more likely to get stuck in a happy loop than a bad loop, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that was really one of the author's intended messages that she was really trying to get out there, but it is something that I took out of the book that I really enjoyed reflecting on. So yeah, overall, the plot and the premise and the themes really, really worked for me. The character work and the prose, not so much, but at the same time, I felt like I was able to appreciate them for what they were, because I felt like I understood what the author's priorities were. So even though the characters and prose are maybe not the best in my opinion, I think a lot of people probably would not really mind. It's just, if this sounds interesting to you, pick it up. The Never Ending End of the World by Anne Christie. I think it's a pretty short read. I never judge that well on ebooks. Like, it's hard to judge how long they really are. But I think it was a good read. If it sounds interesting to you, you should check it out. If you can tell it's not your thing, but that's fine. I would love to know if you are interested in reading this book, or if you have read it, what you think. I would love to know if you are as fascinated as I am by this concept of people being stuck in these random time loops and other people having to kind of live outside of it. Well, let me know if you're going to check out The Never Ending End of the World, and let's pass more books.